Welcome to Hearths of Myths. Welcome back to the warmth of the fire. The nights are drawing in, and the frost is beginning to pattern the window panes with its delicate, fern-like structures. It is the time of year when we instinctively draw closer to the hearth, seeking the comfort of the light against the encroaching dark. Tonight, we are not speaking of the roar of battle, nor the howling of wolves, nor the clash of iron against iron. We are turning our gaze to something quieter, yet infinitely more vital. We are turning to the silence of the fields before the harvest. We are turning to the golden light of the late summer sun as it slants across the heavy heads of wheat. We are turning to the goddess who embodies the very earth that sustains us, the goddess whose name is woven into the fabric of family and peace. We are speaking of Sif. Close your eyes. Let the crackle of the fire fade into the background and replace it with a different sound. Listen for the wind, not the biting gale of winter, but the soft, rustling breeze of late August. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a vast field in the ancient north. The forest looms dark and green in the distance, a wall of pine and spruce, but here, in the clearing, everything is gold. The stalks of grain stand tall, bowed slightly under the weight of their own abundance. They brush against one another with a dry, whispering sound, a susurration that sounds like a secret being shared between the earth and the sky. The air smells of dust, of dried grass, and of the sweet, heavy scent of ripening kernels. This is the domain of Sif. In the vast and complex pantheon of the Norse gods, Sif is a figure who often stands in the shadow of her husband, the thunderous Thor. We know him as the protector, the giant slayer, the loud and boisterous god of the storm. But a storm, for all its power, is a transient event. It rages, it breaks, and it passes. The earth, however, remains. The earth endures. Sif is that enduring presence. She is the ground that receives the rain, the soil that transforms the violence of the storm into the nourishment of life. Without her, the thunder is merely noise. With her, it becomes the catalyst for survival. Tonight, we step out of the shadow of the hammer and into the light of the golden hair. We seek to understand the woman who commands the loyalty of the strongest god in existence, and whose very being is the definition of kinship. To understand Sif, we must first look at her name. In our modern world, names are often just labels, convenient sounds we use to identify one another. But in the ancient Germanic and Norse traditions, a name was a spell. It was a definition of one's soul and purpose. The name Sif is singular. It is ancient, its roots digging deep into the linguistic soil of the Proto-Germanic language. It is related to the word sib, which means affinity, relation, or kin. We see echoes of it in the modern English word sibling and gossip. Originally god-sib, or a god-parent/relative. In the Old Norse worldview, Sif is not merely a name, it is a concept. It translates roughly to relation by marriage, or the extended family. This is a profound realization. Sif is the goddess of the Sipa, the clan. She represents the sacred bonds that hold a society together, while Odin might represent the hierarchy of kings and the madness of inspiration, and Tyr represents the cold, hard lines of law and justice. Sif represents the warmth of belonging. She is the peace weaver. She is the force that turns a group of individuals into a family, and a collection of families into a tribe. In the harsh, unforgiving climate of Scandinavia, where the winter could kill as easily as a sword. The bond of kinship was the only shield that mattered. To be without kin was to be a wolf in the wilderness, an outlaw, a dead man walking. Sif, therefore, is the guardian of the social order that allows life to flourish. She is the frith, the inviolable peace of the household. Imagine her now, not as a warrior in armor, but as a figure of immense quiet dignity, standing in the high hall of Bilskirnir. She is described in the Eddas as one of the most beautiful of the Asynjur, the goddesses. But her beauty is not the wild, untamed, lustful beauty of Freyja. Freyja is the wild desire, the gold that corrupts, the magic of the Vanir that borders on chaos. Sif's beauty is the beauty of the cultivated field. It is ordered, productive, and benevolent. It is the beauty of a table laden with bread, of a cellar filled with ale, of a house that is warm and safe. She is the Husfreyja, the lady of the house, writ large on a cosmic scale. Her most defining feature, the attribute that is celebrated in every poem and every skaldic kenning, is her hair. We cannot speak of Sif without speaking of this hair. It is not merely a color, it is a substance. The myths tell us it is gold, but we must be careful not to think of cold, hard metal. The gold of Sif's hair is living gold. It flows like water. It shines like the sun, and it grows like the grass. When she moves, it is as if a wave is passing through a field of barley. Scholars and storytellers alike have long understood that Sif's hair is a mythological symbol for the grain itself. In the agricultural cycle of the North, the long, golden stalks of wheat and rye were the difference between life and death. When the wind blew through the fields, rippling the crop, the ancients saw the hair of the goddess dancing. When the harvest came, and the scythe cut the stalks, they were shearing the goddess's hair to feed the people. This act of shearing is central to her myth, a trauma and a sacrifice that we will explore in the chapters to come. But for now, picture it in its glory. It falls to her feet, a cascading veil of light that illuminates the dark corners of the hall. It represents the fertility of the earth, the passive, yielding, yet incredibly resilient power of the soil to produce wealth. In the prologue of the prose Edda, the scholar Snorri Sturluson offers us a fascinating, if somewhat euhemerized, glimpse into her origins. He attempts to link the Norse gods to the ancient heroes of Troy and the classical world. In this scholarly genealogy, he identifies Sif not just as a nature spirit, but as a figure of immense wisdom. He calls her a sibyl, a prophetess. He writes that she was the fairest of all women, and her hair was like gold. This connection to the sibyl suggests that Sif possesses a form of knowledge that is distinct from Odin's rune wisdom. Odin hangs on the tree to learn the secrets of magic and death. Sif's wisdom is different. It is the wisdom of the earth. It is the knowledge of cycles, the intuitive understanding of when to sow and when to reap, when to hold fast and when to let go. She knows the secrets of the soil. She knows that death is necessary for life, that the seed must be buried in the cold, dark ground before it can rise again as the green shoot. This Sibylline aspect gives her a mysterious depth. She is not just a trophy wife for the strongest god. She is a seeress of the seasons. She watches the sky with eyes the color of the summer sky, blue and clear, and she knows what the winter will bring. She is the anchor for Thor. Thor is constantly in motion, traveling to the east to fight giants, crossing rivers, creating storms. Sif is the fixed point. She is the home he returns to. Without Sif, Thor has no center. He would be a destructive force without a purpose. He fights to protect Asgard, yes, but more specifically, he fights to protect her. He fights to keep the frost giants from freezing the golden fields. The relationship between the storm and the field is symbiotic and eternal. Let us dwell for a moment on her life before the thunder. The myths are sparse on her parentage, unlike the detailed lineage we have for Odin or Thor. This silence in the archives invites us to look at the nature of the goddess herself for clues. Some interpretations link her to the ancient Earth Mother figures, the Jord archetypes. But Jord is the wild, uncultivated earth, the rocky mountains, the dark forests, the uninhabitable wastes. Sif is the arable land. She is the earth that has entered into a contract with humanity. She implies the existence of a settlement, a farm, a fence. She is the line where the wilderness ends and civilization begins. In the time before she was the wife of Thor, we can imagine her walking the valleys of the primeval world. Wherever she stepped, the grass grew greener. Wherever she sat, the flowers bloomed. But her domain was not the chaotic proliferation of the jungle. It was the ordered abundance of the meadow. She was the guardian of the wild grains, the ancestor of the wheat that would one day allow humanity to build cities. She was solitary in her splendor, a queen of the golden silence. The giants, the Jotnar, watched her from their cold mountains with envious eyes. They, who dwelt in the rocks and the ice, coveted her warmth. They wanted to drag the golden goddess into the dark, to possess the fertility they lacked. This tension, the desire of the chaotic cold to possess the fertile warmth, is the driving engine of many Norse myths. Sif stands at the center of this desire. She is the prize. She is the treasure of Asgard, more valuable than the golden apples of Idun. For while the apples grant eternal youth, the grain grants life itself for the day-to-day. Her character is often portrayed as passive, but this is a misunderstanding of the feminine power in Norse mythology. In a culture that valued physical strength and martial prowess, the power of the peace weaver was a subtle but iron-clad necessity. The Husfreyja held the keys to the stores. She decided who ate and who starved. She controlled the weaving of the cloth, the brewing of the mead, and the raising of the children. In the great hall, it was the lady who bore the mead cup to the warriors. This was not a servant's role. It was a ritual of inclusion. By offering the cup, she was knitting the warrior into the kinship of the hall. She was granting him frith. When Sif moves through the halls of Asgard, offering the horn of mead to the gods, she is reinforcing the bonds that keep the universe from flying apart. She is the gravity of the divine court. Even her clothing reflects this connection to the harvest and the earth. We might visualize her dressed in linen, the fabric made from the flax plant, another gift of the soil. Her garments would be dyed with the natural colors of the earth, the yellow of woad, the madder red of roots, the soft browns of walnut shells. She does not wear the armor of the Valkyries. Her protection is her dignity and her sacred status. To harm Sif, to insult her, is to insult the very foundation of life. It is to curse the bread in your mouth. This is why the crime that will later be committed against her, The shearing of her hair is so heinous. It is not just a cosmetic assault. It is an ecological catastrophe. It is the desecration of the source of life. There is a melancholy to Sif as well, a shadow that lingers behind the gold. The harvest, after all, is a time of ending. The wheat must be cut to be used. The golden days of summer are fleeting, and they are always followed by the gray of winter. Sif stands on this threshold. She is the fullness of life that knows it is temporary. She bears this knowledge with a stoic grace. Unlike the gods who constantly seek to cheat their fate, Odin with his quest for runes, Idun with her apples, Sif accepts the cycle. She blooms, she ripens, she is harvested, and she rests. She understands that you cannot have the gold without the scythe. In her early days, before the Aesir fully established their dominance, Sif's presence would have been a beacon. The early humans, living in their mud-wattle huts, scratching a living from the thin soil of the north, would have looked to her with desperate adoration. They would have seen her face in the full moon of the harvest month. They would have heard her voice in the grinding of the quernstones as they turned grain into flour. Every loaf of bread broken at a table was a prayer to Sif. Every sheaf of wheat tied and stacked to dry was an altar to her glory. She was the most intimate of the deities. You might go your whole life without seeing the flash of Odin's spear or feeling the rage of Thor's hammer, but you interacted with Sif every time you ate. She was in the blood and bone of every person who survived the winter. And let us not forget the concept of sippe, kinship, in relation to the other gods. As the wife of Thor, she brings a moderating influence to his lineage. Thor is half-giant. His mother, Jord, is a Jotun. His father, Odin, is a god of war and death. Thor has a nature that is prone to excess, to violence, to the shattering of boundaries. Sif anchors him to the civilized world. Through her, Thor becomes the protector of society, not just a wandering brawler. She civilizes the storm. She gives the thunder a home to defend. When Thor roars in the sky, he is terrifying. But when he returns to Bilskirnir and sits beside Sif, he is a husband and a father. He is the warder of the earth, a title that makes sense only because Sif is the earth that is being warded. This dynamic creates a domestic sphere that is unique in Asgard. Bilskirnir, their home, is located in the realm of Thrudheim, the world of strength. But inside the world of strength lies the heart of tenderness. The hall is vast, 540 rooms, as the poems tell us, making it the largest of all buildings. Imagine the scale of it. A mansion of clouds and lightning, anchored by the golden warmth of Sif. It is a place where the weary traveler, the exhausted warrior, can find rest. Sif moves through these 540 rooms like a sunbeam, moving through a canyon. She ensures that the guest is fed, that the fire is stoked, that the linen is clean. This hospitality is a sacred duty, and Sif is its high priestess. We must also consider the silence of Sif in the primary texts. She speaks very little in the Eddas. She is often an observer, a presence. But in the oral tradition, silence is not emptiness. Silence is a container. Sif's silence is the silence of the listening earth. She hears the boasts of the gods, the lies of Loki, the worries of the mortals. She absorbs it all, like the soil that absorbs the rain, the blood of battles, and the fallen leaves. She takes everything in and transmutes it. Her silence is powerful. It forces the others to reflect. When the loud arguments of the Aesir ring out, Sif's quiet presence is a reminder of the reality that underpins their existence. You can argue about honor and glory all you want, but if the harvest fails, everyone dies. Her silence says, I am the reality. You are the noise. As we prepare to delve deeper into her saga, into the trials she will face and the children she will bear, keep this image of her firmly in your mind. Sif is the Golden One. She is the bond of blood and marriage that keeps the darkness at bay. She is the beauty that is useful, the wealth that is shared. She is the whisper in the wheat field that says, you will survive the winter. The air around her seems to shimmer with a latent energy. It is the energy of growth. If you were to touch the hem of her dress, you might feel the pulse of the sap rising in the trees. If you were to look deep into her eyes, you would see the reflection of 1,000 summers past and 1,000 summers yet to come. She is ancient, yet she is renewed every year. She is Sif, and her story is the story of the world's survival. But even the most perfect summer must face the threat of the blight. Even the strongest kinship can be tested by malice. In the golden perfection of Sif's existence, there was a vulnerability. Her greatest treasure, her hair, was open to the sky. And in the shadows of Asgard, eyes that loved chaos were watching, eyes that despised perfection, eyes that belonged to the trickster, the breaker of bonds, the one who shreds the web of Frith, Loki. The stage is set, the fields are ripe. The goddess is asleep in her bower, her golden hair spread out across the pillow like a fan of spun sunlight. The air is still, too still. It is the calm before a different kind of storm, not a storm of rain and thunder, but a storm of shame and malice. But before the scissors cut, before the tragedy strikes, let us linger just a moment longer in this perfection. Let us breathe in the scent of the wheat. Let us feel the warmth of the sun. For in the life of Sif, as in the life of the land, such moments of perfect, unbroken peace are rare, and they are beautiful. For the scythe. But it will not be for the scythe. But it will not be a farmer's hand that wields the blade. It will be the hand of a god who knows no honor. And from that act of violation, a new story will grow. A story of iron, of gold, and of the unbreaking will of the earth to restore itself. The night deepens. The fire burns low. The image of the golden goddess fades into the embers, waiting to be recalled. We leave her there, in the sanctity of her sleep, unaware that the shadow is already creeping across the floorboards of Bilskirnir. The silence of the field is about to be broken. The silence of the wheat field is a waiting silence. It is the hush of the earth holding its breath, anticipating the first drop of rain. And in the mythological landscape of the north, that rain does not come gently. It comes with the rattle of chariot wheels, the flash of iron, and the roar of a god who knows no subtlety. If Sif is the golden silence of the waiting soil, then Thor is the inevitable crashing noise that breaks it. Their union is not merely a marriage of two deities. It is the fundamental meteorological event that allows life to exist in the north. It is the collision of the high, volatile atmosphere with the deep, receptive ground. To understand Sif fully, we must understand who she chose to bind herself to. Thor, the red-bearded one, the slayer of giants. He is a being of immense, overflowing vitality. His laughter shakes the rafters of Valhalla. His anger splits mountains. He is constantly in motion, a kinetic force that cannot be contained. He travels to the east to battle the chaotic forces of the Jotnar, wielding Mjolnir with a terrifying joy. He is the protector, yes, but he is also the embodiment of the dangerous, unpredictable sky. A storm can water the crops, but a storm can also flatten them. A storm can break the drought, but it can also flood the valley. This is where Sif becomes the essential counterweight. If Thor is the raw power of the weather, Sif is the purpose of that weather. Without the field to receive the rain, the storm is just violence. It beats against the barren rock, washing away the soil, achieving nothing but erosion. But when the storm meets the field, when Thor comes home to Sif, the violence is transformed into fertility. The heavy, driving rain soaks into the furrows. The lightning fixes nitrogen in the soil, feeding the roots. The terrifying power of the god is domesticated, channeled, and made useful. In the eyes of the ancient Norse farmers, the marriage of Thor and Sif was the sacred drama enacted every summer. When the thunderheads piled up over the fjords, turning the sky a bruised purple, they knew Thor was riding his chariot. They felt fear, certainly. But when they looked at their golden fields, swaying in the wind before the rain, they saw Sif waiting for her husband. They understood that this frightening union was necessary. The thunder god must lie with the corn goddess for the harvest to happen. This dynamic plays out in their home, Bilskirnir. We must speak of this hall, for a god's home is a reflection of their soul. Bilskirnir is located in Thrudheim, the world of strength. The poems tell us it has 540 rooms. Let your mind wander through that number, 540. It is a staggering figure, implying a structure of labyrinthine complexity and immense scale. It is larger than Valhalla. It is larger than the high seats of Odin. It is a city contained within a single roof. Imagine walking through those halls. The architecture is sturdy, built of oak beams as thick as ancient trees, and stones hewn from the bedrock of the world. It needs to be strong, for its master is a god who cracks floors when he walks. The air inside smells of ozone, the sharp, metallic scent of lightning that clings to Thor's cloak. But it also smells of something warmer, softer. It smells of baked bread, of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, of brewing ale, and of clean linen. This is Sif's influence. In a hall of 540 rooms, there is chaos potential. Servants running, warriors boasting, guests arriving from all 9 worlds. Yet, Bilskirnir is described as a place of order. Sif is the mistress of this vast domain. She moves through the corridors, not with the heavy tread of a warrior, but with the purposeful, gliding step of a queen. She carries the keys at her belt, the symbol of the Norse housewife's authority. Those keys open the storehouses, the mead chests, the weapon lockers. She knows what is in every room. She knows which guest needs a warm cloak, which servant needs a kind word, and when her husband needs silence. Thor, for all his bluster, is a simple god in his desires. He wants to eat, he wants to fight, and he wants to protect what is his. But he is also prone to rages. The Moder, the divine wrath. can cloud his mind. When he returns from his journeys, covered in the blood of trolls and the grime of the road, he is a tempest confined in a room. It is Sif who meets him. She does not cower. She does not match his shout with a shout. She meets his turbulence with her golden calm. She pours the mead. She places her hand on his arm. And just as the heavy rain eventually softens the hard earth, her presence softens the hard edges of the god. In her company, the giant slayer becomes the husband. This domesticity is a radical act in a mythology defined by war. Sif creates a space where peace is possible. In the middle of Thrudheim, surrounded by the trophies of 1,000 battles, Sif maintains a sanctuary of frith. It is said that no blood can be shed in the sanctuary of the household, and Sif is the enforcer of this law. Even Loki, the agent of chaos, must mind his tongue when Sif stands in her power in her own hall. She represents the civilizing force that keeps the Aesir from becoming just another tribe of violent giants. And here, we must make a crucial distinction, one that adds a layer of profound depth to Sif's character. We must look at the difference between Thor's mother and Thor's wife. Thor is the son of Odin and Jord. Jord simply means earth, but Jord is the Jotun earth. She is the wild, uncultivated, uninhabited wilderness. She is the granite mountain peak where no nothing grows. She is the deep, dark forest where the wolves hunt. She is the glacier and the swamp. Thor draws his strength from her. His rock-breaking, mountain-moving physical power comes from this primal, chaotic earth ancestry. But he marries Sif. Sif is also earth, but she is the cultivated earth. She is the field that has been cleared of stones. She is the hillside that has been terraced. She is the garden that has been weeded. She is the sipe, the earth that supports the family. This transition from Jord to Sif represents the evolution of humanity itself. We began in the wild, subject to the mercy of the raw elements, Jord. But through labor, through wisdom, and through the bonds of kinship, we transformed the wild earth into the home, Sif. Thor spans this bridge. He is born of the wild, but he is sworn to protect the sown. He fights for Sif because she represents the fragile, beautiful thing that humanity has built out of the chaos. If the frost giants were to win, the world would not disappear. It would simply return to Jord. It would become a frozen wasteland. The wheat would die. The Sif aspect of the world would vanish, leaving only the Jord aspect. So, when Thor lifts his hammer to smash a skull, he is not just fighting a monster. He is fighting for the concept of agriculture. He is fighting for the right of the wheat to grow tall. He is fighting for Sif. In the hall of Bilskirnir, Sif's role extends beyond her husband. She is the mother, the stepmother, and the hostess. We see her interactions with the servants, Thialfi and Röskva. These two mortal children, given to Thor as bondservants after a transgression involving one of Thor's goats, live in the hall of the gods. It must be a terrifying existence for a mortal to live among these titans. Yet, we can imagine Sif as their protector within the household. While Thor drags Thialfi on dangerous adventures to race against thoughts and hug fire, Sif ensures that Röskva has a place by the fire. She teaches the mortal children the ways of the high court. She weaves them into the fabric of the divine family. The imagery of weaving is appropriate here. In ancient times, the women of the household were the weavers. They took the raw wool and flax and turned it into cloth. This was a magical act, creating order out of tangled chaos. Sif is the weaver of relationships. The Aesir are a fractious, dysfunctional family. Odin is distant and manipulative. Loki is malicious. Freyja is independent and fierce. Heimdall is silent. It is Sif who binds them together in the social rituals of the feast. Picture a feast in the great hall. The fires are roaring in the long hearths down the center of the room. The tables are groaning under the weight of roasted boar and root vegetables, the bounty of Sif's earth. The air is thick with smoke and laughter. Thor sits at the high table, his red beard bristling, laughing at a joke made by Tyr. But Sif is the center of gravity. She wears a gown of the palest yellow, the color of the early dawn on a wheat field. Her hair is braided in complicated knots, shining like a beacon. She moves with a flagon of mead, pouring for the guests. This pouring of the mead is not servitude, it is sovereignty. In the Germanic tradition, the queen offers the cup to the king first, then to the highest-ranking warriors. By determining the order of the cup, she defines the hierarchy of the hall. She honors the brave and slights the coward. Sif, with her quiet grace, controls the social currency of Asgard. She reinforces the bonds of loyalty. When she hands the cup to Thor, their eyes meet, the blue of the sky and the gold of the earth, and the covenant of survival is renewed. Can only stand and endure. Sif's power is can only stand and endure. Sif's power is the power of endurance, but endurance is not invulnerability. Her greatest asset, her connection to the life force of the grain, symbolized by her hair, is also her point of greatest exposure. The golden hair is not just a personal ornament. It is the external soul of the land. If the grain is cut at the harvest, it is a sacrifice that feeds the people. It is a controlled death that leads to life. But what if the grain is cut before its time? What if the hair is shorn not by the loving hand of the harvester, but by the malicious hand of the vandal? In the shadows of Bilskirnir, where the firelight does not quite reach, envy festers. Loki, the blood brother of Odin, the companion of Thor, watches Sif. He hates her perfection. He hates the frith she represents because his nature is to disrupt. He sees the adoration in Thor's eyes. He sees the way the other gods respect her quiet dignity. He sees the golden hair that shines even in the dark. To Loki, Sif is an affront. She is too perfect, too settled, too kin-bound. He is the outsider, the traveler, the changeling. He wants to see what happens when the perfect bond is severed. He wants to see if the peace weaver can unravel. He does not want her gold. He wants her humiliation. He wants to turn the goddess of the grain into a shorn, shamed creature. The tension builds slowly. It is like the humidity rising before a summer storm. Sif goes about her duties, unaware of the eyes watching her from the dark corners of the 540 rooms. She trusts the sanctity of her home. She trusts that being the wife of the strongest god makes her safe. But the walls of Bilskirnir can stop a giant, but they cannot stop a traitor who lives within the gates. She unbinds her hair. It tumbles down her. She unbinds her hair. It tumbles down her back, a river of light. She brushes it, counting the strokes, a meditative ritual that connects her to the rhythm of the seasons. She lays her head on the pillow, and the golden hair fans out around her. covering the linens, glowing softly in the starlight. She sleeps, the deep, trusting sleep of the earth in winter. And then the door creaks. A shadow slips into the room. It is not a giant breaking down the door. It is a silent, slinking presence. Loki stands over the bed. He looks down at the magnificent golden hair. He does not see beauty. He sees a target. He reaches into his tunic and pulls out a pair of shears. The metal is cold. His smile is colder. The calm of the narrative is about to be shattered. The marriage of storm and soil is strong, but it is about to be tested by a crime that strikes at the very identity of the goddess. The harvest is about to be stolen in the night. We leave Sif there, in the last moments of her wholeness, the golden hair intact, the bond of kinship unbroken. The silence of the room is heavy, pregnant with the coming violation. The storm is asleep, but the knife is awake. And so, the greatest beauty in Asgard becomes the victim of the greatest pettiness. The crime of the shorn hair is not just a prank. It is an assault on the fertility of the world. And when the sun rises, the scream that will tear through Bilskirnir will not be one of battle fury, but of absolute, heartbreaking loss. The air in the bedchamber was still, heavy with the scent of lavender and the fading warmth of the hearth, but the silence had changed. It was no longer the peaceful silence of sleep. It was the tense, vibrating silence of a crime in progress. Loki stood over the sleeping goddess, his shadow falling across her face. In his hand, the iron shears gleamed dully in the low light of the embers. He did not hesitate. There was no moment of moral struggle, no hesitation of conscience. His envy was a cold, sharp thing, as precise as the blades he held. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the silk of the pillow, and gathered the first heavy lock of Sif's golden hair. Loki positioned the shears close to thee. Loki positioned the shears close to the scalp, careful not to wake her, careful to take everything. The metal bit into the gold. There was a sound, a soft, wet snick, like the severing of a stalk. The lock fell away, sliding from the pillow to the floor in a coil of dead light. Loki worked quickly. Snick, snick. The golden river was dammed. The halo was dismantled. With every cut, he was stripping away her identity, reducing the queen of the high hall to something less, something broken. He moved with the efficiency of a bitter harvest, reaping where he had not sown, destroying what he could not create. Within moments, it was done. The magnificent floor-length veil of gold lay in a heap on the floorboards, lifeless and dull now that it was severed from the source. Sif lay on the pillow, her head strangely small, her scalp pale and exposed to the cool air of the room. She looked vulnerable, almost childlike, stripped of her crown. Loki looked down at his handiwork, a smirk twisting his scarred lips. He had not just cut hair, he had cut the connection between the earth and the sky. He gathered the stolen gold, stuffing it into a pouch, for even in his malice he was greedy, and slipped out of the room as silently as smoke, leaving behind a tragedy that would shake the foundations of Asgard. Sif slept on, but her sleep was no longer peaceful. In her dreams, the winter came early. She dreamed of fields turning black, of the frost killing the roots, of the wind howling over barren stubble. She felt a cold draft, a sensation of nakedness that seeped into her bones. She shivered, pulling the furs closer, but the cold was not in the room. It was on her. She woke with the gray light of dawn. The first sensation was a strange lightness. Her head felt unanchored, floating. She reached up, instinctively, to brush the hair from her face, a morning ritual she had performed for thousands of years. Her hand met nothing but air. She reached back, expecting the heavy, comforting weight of the braid, the mass of gold that was her pride and her power. Her fingers touched skin. Short, bristly, uneven stubble. The realization did not come all at once. It came in a slow, suffocating wave of horror. She sat up, her hands exploring the devastation. Gone. It was all gone. She looked at the floor. There were stray strands glittering in the dust, the debris of the violation. She did not scream. The shock was too deep for sound. She brought her hands to her face, covering her eyes, as if by not seeing it, she could undo it. But the feeling of the draft on her neck was undeniable. In the culture of the North, hair was not merely aesthetic. For a free woman, and especially for a queen, long hair was the symbol of her status, her health, and her hummingja, her luck and spiritual power. To be shorn was the punishment of a slave. It was the mark of an adulteress, a woman who had disgraced her clan. By stripping her of her hair, the intruder had visually reduced the wife of Thor to the status of a thrall, a servant, a woman without honor. The shame burned hotter than fire. How could she face the court? How could she pour the mead for the warriors? How could she stand beside Thor, the god of pride, looking like a shorn sheep? Tears came then, hot and silent. They fell onto her hands, watering nothing. She curled into herself, pulling the blanket over her head, hiding the evidence of her disgrace. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the earth to open and swallow her, to return to the dark soil where no one could see her shame. But the door opened. Heavy footsteps shook the floor. Thor entered. He was cheerful, perhaps expecting to wake his wife with a kiss, expecting the morning routine of the golden light filling the room. He stopped. He saw the heap of blankets. He saw the strange, huddled posture of his wife. "Sif?" His voice was a rumble of concern. "The sun is up. Why do you hide?" Sif did not answer. She could not bear to speak. Thor approached, his hand reaching out to pull back the cover. She resisted, holding it tight, but she was no match for the strength that lifted serpents. He gently peeled the blanket away. He saw her. He saw the pale, shorn scalp. He saw the tear-streaked face. For a moment, Thor did not understand. It was too alien, too impossible. But then, his eyes moved to the floor, to the few stray golden hairs that Loki had missed. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The cheerful husband vanished. In his place stood the thunder. His face turned a deep, bruised purple. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the bedpost, the wood groaning and splintering under his fingers. The air in the room suddenly dropped in temperature, the pressure plummeting, as if a hurricane had formed instantly within the four walls. He did not ask who did it. He knew. There was only one being in all the 9 worlds with the combination of access, stealth, and sheer pointless malice to commit such a crime. Loki. The name was not spoken. It was growled, a vibration that rattled the window panes. Thor turned, his cape swirling around him, and marched out of the room. He did not run. He moved with the terrifying inevitability of a landslide. He hunted. Sif was left alone in the silence. She rose slowly, moving to the polished metal mirror on the wall. She forced herself to look. The image that stared back was a stranger. Her eyes were red, her face pale, and above it, the jagged, ugly crop of the shear marks. She touched the stubble again. It felt dead. It felt like the dry stalks of wheat left in the field after the harvest is done, and the winter snow is beginning to fall. She was the Fimbulwinter field. She was the earth without growth. She felt a profound sense of grief, not for her vanity, but for the symbol she carried. If the goddess of the grain is shorn, what hope is there for the world? Meanwhile, the storm had found its target. Thor found Loki lounging in one of the lower courtyards, perhaps already boasting of his prank to some minor spirits. Thor did not speak. He seized Loki by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one hand. The legends say he shook him so hard that Loki's teeth rattled in his skull. He dragged him toward the high cliff of Asgard, intending to throw him off, to let him fall until he hit the roots of the world. "I will break every bone in your body," Thor whispered, his voice sounding like grinding stones. "I will grind you into dust. You have shamed her. You have shamed me." Loki, dangling over the abyss, his feet kicking in the empty air, saw death in Thor's eyes. He saw no mercy. He gasped, choking, his hands clawing at Thor's iron grip. "Wait," Loki wheezed. "Wait! I can fix it! I can restore it!" Thor stopped, but he did not loosen his grip. "You cannot fix what is cut," he snarled. "The grass does not grow back in a day. The hair is dead." "Not dead," Loki screamed, desperate. "Not if I go to the Black Elves. Not if I go to the sons of Ivaldi. They are master smiths. They can spin gold that lives. They can make hair that grows." Thor stared at him, the red rage slowly cooling into a cold, calculating demand. He pulled Loki back from the edge and slammed him against the wall. "Listen to me, trickster," Thor said, leaning in until their noses touched. "You will go to Svartalfheim. You will go now, and you will bring back hair for Sif, not a wig, not a crown, living gold, hair that attaches to her flesh and grows like her own. If you fail, if it is not perfect, I will not just kill you, I will unmake you." He dropped Loki. The trickster scrambled to his feet, rubbing his bruised throat, coughing. He nodded, terrified. He turned and fled, shape-shifting into a falcon, or simply running faster than thought, diving down the roots of Yggdrasil, down into the dark, toward the realm of the dwarves. Back in Bilskirnir, the waiting began. This was the hardest part for Sif. While the men acted, one in rage, one in fear, she had to endure the stillness of her shame. She refused to leave her chambers. She refused to let the servants see her. She found a scarf of blue silk and wrapped her head tightly, hiding the scars of the shears. She sat by the window, watching the sun move across the sky, feeling the phantom weight of the braid that was no longer there. She felt off balance, physically and spiritually. The connection to the earth felt thin. In the depths of Svartalfheim, a different kind of magic was at work. Loki had found the sons of Ivaldi, the legendary craftsmen of the deep earth. He had pleaded his case, likely using a mix of flattery and threats. He needed a miracle. He needed gold that behaved like organic matter. The dwarves were intrigued. To make a sword that never breaks is difficult. To make a ring that drips wealth is complex. but to make metal that mimics the biological process of growth. That was a challenge worthy of their art. They did not use the heavy anvils and the roaring furnaces used for weapons. They used the soft forges. Imagine the scene in the cavern. The air is hot and smells of sulfur and ozone. The sons of Ivaldi take the purest gold, gold that has never seen the light of the sun, gold that has been refined 7 times. They melt it down, not into a liquid, but into a plasma, a glowing essence of metal. They begin to spin it. They use tools as fine as spider legs, tweezers made of diamond, hammers no bigger than needles. They draw the gold out into filaments thinner than a human hair, thinner than a spider's web. They chant as they work. This is Galdr, the magic song of creation. They sing of the roots of the birch tree drinking from the soil. They sing of the sap rising in the spring. They sing of the blood flowing in the veins. They are singing life into the metal. They are teaching the gold how to be a plant, how to be a part of a body. The result was a skein of gold, thousands of strands, flowing like water in their hands. It was cool to the touch, but warmed instantly against the skin. It did not tangle. It shone with its own internal light. When Loki held it, he felt a strange vibration, the pulse of the magic. It was ready. He returned to Asgard. The journey back was frantic. He carried other gifts, the spear Gungnir for Odin, the ship Skidbladnir for Frey. But his survival depended entirely on the hair. He arrived at the great hall of Gladsheim, where the gods had assembled for judgment. Sif was there. She had been summoned. She stood beside Thor, her head still wrapped in the blue scarf, her eyes downcast. She felt the gaze of the assembly. Odin on his high seat, Frey with his serene smile, Tyr with his stern judgment. They all knew. The silence was thick with pity and embarrassment. Loki entered. He did not strut this time. He walked carefully, holding the leather pouch like a votive offering. He approached Thor and Sif. He knelt. "Lord Thor," Loki said, his voice unusually respectful. "Lady Sif, I have brought the ransom." He opened the pouch. He pulled out the golden skein. A collective gasp went through the hall. It caught the light of the torches and multiplied it, sending beams of radiance dancing across the ceiling. It looked like liquid fire. Loki stood and approached Sif. "Remove the veil," he whispered. Sif looked at Thor. He nodded, his hand resting on the pommel of his hammer, ready to strike if this was another trick. Slowly, with trembling hands, Sif reached up. She untied the knot of the blue scarf. She let the silk fall away. The sight of her shorn head was shocking in the bright light of the hall. It was a raw, naked wound on her dignity. There was a moment of painful silence. Loki stepped forward. He held the mass of golden filaments over her head. "This is not a wig," he announced to the hall. "This is the harvest returned." He placed the gold onto her scalp. The moment the metal touched her skin, something impossible happened. There was no seam, no gap. The gold did not sit on her head. It sank into it. Sif gasped, her hands flying to her temples. She felt a sensation like 1,000 tiny roots digging into the soil, a prickling, rushing feeling of connection. The coldness of the metal vanished instantly, replaced by the warmth of living flesh. The gold began to move. It lengthened. It grew visible inches in seconds, cascading down her neck, over her shoulders, down her back, pooling on the floor around her feet. It was heavier than her old hair, denser, richer. It shone with a brilliance that made the sun seem pale. She shook her head, and the hair moved with her, swinging with the natural weight of organic life. Sif laughed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. She ran her hands through it. She could feel the sensation of her fingers against her scalp through the hair. It had nerves. It had life. She was whole again. No, she was more than whole. She was enhanced. She was now truly the Golden One, the living embodiment of the Earth's wealth. Thor let out a roar of approval that shook the dust from the rafters. He grabbed Sif in a bear hug, burying his face in the new, miraculous gold. The smell of it was not metallic. It smelled of summer rain and ripe wheat. The crisis was averted. The winter had been turned back into spring by the force of magic and the threat of violence. The gods cheered. Even Odin nodded in approval, his one eye glinting. Loki stood back, relieved, wiping the sweat from his brow. He had saved his skin. He had paid the debt. But for Sif, as she stood there basking in the return of her power, the memory of the violation remained. She was beautiful again, yes. She was powerful again. But she now carried a part of the deep earth with her. She was no longer just the goddess of the surface soil. She was now connected to the subterranean forges, to the deep magic of the dwarves. Her nature had been deepened. She was the gold that had been through the fire, was healed. The scar, the memory of the was healed. The scar, the memory of the shears would remain. She had learned that even a goddess can be stripped, and she had learned that true power is the ability to grow back, even when you have been cut down to the root. The hall dissolved into feasting and celebration. The mead flowed. The poets began to compose verses about Sif's golden headpiece, but Sif sat quietly by her husband, her hand resting on his arm, her mind far away. She was thinking of the wheat fields. She was thinking of how they fall every year under the scythe, only to rise again. She understood now, in a way she never had before, that she was the field, and the field endures everything. The chapter of the theft was closed, but the story of Sif was far from over. She had her hair, but she also had a past, and she had children who were not of Thor's blood. As the golden light of her new hair illuminated the hall, it cast long shadows, shadows that hinted at other mysteries, at cold valleys and ancient archers. For before she was the wife of the thunder, she was the mother of the winter. And in the next turn of our tale, we must leave the golden warmth of the hall and travel to the Yew Dales to meet the silent son of Sif, the god of the ski and the bow. We must speak of Ullr. The new hair grew. It settled into the rhythm of Sif's life, heavy and warm, a constant reminder of the magic that binds the earth to the deep places. But as the wheel of the year turned, the golden light of the harvest began to fade. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long, blue shadows across the fields of Asgard. The air grew crisp, smelling of wood smoke and coming snow. And with the arrival of winter, the golden goddess did not diminish. She merely changed. For Sif is not only the goddess of the standing grain, she is the goddess of the stubble field. She is the earth after the harvest, the earth that sleeps under the blanket of snow, the earth that holds the secrets of the seed in the dark. It is in this season, when the thunder of Thor is less frequent, and the storms turn to silent, falling snow, that Sif's thoughts turn to her firstborn. Before she was the wife of the Thunderer, before she was the lady of Bilskirnir, Sif was a mother, and the child she bore in those ancient, mist-shrouded days is one of the most mysterious and majestic figures in the entire Norse pantheon. We speak of Ullr, means "you dales." It is a place of deep, means "you dales." It is a place of deep, silent forests where the ancient yew trees grow, trees with dark, evergreen needles and toxic red berries, trees that can live for thousands of years. The yew is the tree of death and the tree of bows. It is flexible, strong, and eternal. This is the home of Ullr, the god of the bow, the god of the ski, the god of the shield, and he is Sif's son. The paternity of Ullr is a subject of great debate among the scholars of the lore, a mystery that Sif keeps locked in her heart. The Eddas call him simply Thor's stepson. This title is significant. It acknowledges that Ullr is not of Thor's blood, yet he is fully accepted within the divine family. Who was his father? Some whisper the name of Aurvandil the Brave, a figure associated with the stars and the frost. Others suggest that Ullr has no father in the traditional sense, that he was born of the winter itself, a parthenogenesis of the earth responding to the cold. When Sif travels to Ullr to visit her son, she leaves behind the golden silks of the court. She dresses in furs, white wolf, silver fox. She walks through the snow not as a queen, but as a mother returning to her wildest creation. The silence of Ullr is profound. It is not the empty silence of a void, but the expectant silence of a hunter. The snow absorbs all sound. The trees stand like sentinels, their dark branches heavy with white powder. There, in a hall built of living yew wood, she finds him. Ullr is described as a beautiful god, fair of face like his mother, but with the hardness of the ice. He does not have Thor's red beard or his fiery temper. Ullr is cool, precise, and deadly. He is the god of the single combat, the duel. While Thor fights with the chaotic energy of a storm, Ullr fights with the calculated precision of a sniper. He is the master of the bow. The relationship between Sif and Ullr is a study in contrasts. She is the golden field. He is the white snow that covers it. Yet they are inextricably linked. The snow protects the earth. It insulates the soil, keeping the frost from penetrating too deep and killing the roots of the grain. Ullr is the guardian of Sif's dormancy. When the harvest is cut and Sif is shorn by the seasons, it is Ullr who covers her shame with a blanket of white. He is the winter that allows the summer to return. Imagine the meeting between mother and son. Sif enters his hall, her golden hair shining like a trapped sunbeam in the gloom of the winter lodge. Ullr rises to greet her. He is tall, lean, moving with the fluid grace of a skier. He wears skis on his feet, ondur in the Old Norse, curved planks of wood that allow him to glide over the deepest drifts. He holds a bow made of yew, strung with the gut of a bear. He does not embrace her with the crushing force of Thor. He bows, offering her the respect due to the earth that bore him. They speak of the old days, before the walls of Asgard were built so high. They speak of the time when the gods were fewer and the world was wilder. Sif sees in Ullr the reflection of her own ancient nature. Before she was civilized by her marriage to the guardian of society, she was a goddess of the wild earth. Ullr is the living memory of that time. He is the part of her that never quite moved into the house. He prefers the open sky, the biting wind, the solitude of the hunt. Thor's relationship with his stepson is equally fascinating. In many mythologies, the stepchild is a figure of resentment or conflict. But in the North, the bond of fostering was sacred. To raise another man's child was a sign of power and generosity. Thor is proud of Ullr. He respects the boy's strength. The Eddas tell us that Thor and Ullr are allies. When Thor goes into the deep wilderness to hunt giants, it is often Ullr who scouts the path. Thor is the hammer that crushes. Ullr is the arrow that finds the eye. There is a specific kennings, a poetic metaphor, used for Ullr. Sif's son. He is defined by his mother. This matrilineal link is powerful. It suggests that his status among the Aesir comes from her. He is a god of high nobility. In fact, some ancient texts suggest that Ullr was once a much more prominent deity, perhaps even a chief sky god before Odin and Thor rose to dominance. There are more places in Scandinavia named after Ullr, Ullenshof, Ullensaker, than almost any other god, suggesting a widespread and ancient cult. He was the god invoked for oaths. Why oaths? Because the winter is a time of truth. In the summer, hidden by the leaves and the tall grass, one can hide. In the winter, on the white snow, every track is visible. Nothing can be concealed. Ullr sees everything. To swear on the ring of Ullr was the most binding oath a Norseman could take. Sif, as the goddess of kinship and social bonds, understands this. Her son is the enforcer of the truth that maintains those bonds. If Sif weaves the peace, Ullr hardens it. We can imagine Sif watching Ullr craft his weapons. The yew wood is hard, resistant. It takes patience to shape. Ullr works with a knife, shaving the wood, testing the flex. Sif watches his hands, strong, capable hands, so like her own, yet touched by the cold. She sees the focus in his eyes. He is a god of discipline. This is the other side of the agricultural coin. Farming requires the discipline of the season. Survival requires the discipline of the hunt. Sif and Ullr represent the two halves of the survival equation, the grain in the barn and the meat in the larder. There is a myth preserved in the Gesta Danorum by Saxo Grammaticus that hints at a time when Ullr ruled in Odin's place. It is said that when Odin was exiled for a time, a period of chaos or shame, Ullr took the high seat. He ruled Asgard. This interregnum of Ullr represents the triumph of the winter over the spirit. For a season, the cold logic of survival ruled the cosmos. And who stood beside him? His mother, Sif. The earth endured the rule of ice, knowing that the sun would eventually return. This story highlights the immense, latent power of Sif's lineage. Her son is not just a hunter, he is a king in waiting. But Ullr is not a god who desires the throne. He desires the silence of Ullr. He desires the hiss of the skis on the powder. He desires the perfect shot. And Sif respects this. She does not try to bring him into the noise of Bilskirnir. She leaves him to his dales. She understands that every family has its solitary members, the ones who guard the boundaries. As Sif prepares to leave Ullr and return to Thrudheim, the contrast becomes stark. She is going back to the fire, to the feast, to the loud, boisterous love of Thor. She is leaving the cool blue shadows of the yew forest. She kisses her son on the forehead. His skin is cold, like polished marble. The winter is long, she might say. The bow is strong, he would reply. It is a simple exchange, but it carries the weight of a geas. As long as Ullr holds the bow, the winter will not kill the world. It will only cleanse it. Sif's journey back to Asgard is a transition from the wild to the sown. As she descends from the mountains, the snow gives way to brown earth, then to the green shoots of early spring. Her golden hair, which seemed pale in the blue light of Ullr, begins to glow again with the warmth of the sun. She is returning to her role as the Husfreyja, but she carries the chill of the yew-dales in her heart. She knows that the golden wheat is only half the story. This duality, the mother of the harvest and the mother of the winter, gives Sif a complexity that is often missed. She is not a one-dimensional fertility idol. She is the cycle itself. She is the life that persists through death. And in her son Ullr, she has given the world the tools to survive the darkness, the ski to move over the obstacle, the bow to strike from a distance, and the shield to protect the body. Speaking of shields, there is a kenning for a shield. Ullr's ship. This is a puzzle. Why is a shield a ship? Perhaps because on the snow, a shield can be used as a sled. Or perhaps because, like a ship carries a man over the water, a shield carries a man safely through the storm of arrows. Sif, too, is a shield. She shields her family from the disintegration of chaos. She shields Thor from his own worst impulses. When she returns to Bilskirnir, the hall seems louder than before. Thor is there, perhaps wrestling with Thialfi or sharpening Mjolnir. He looks up and sees her. He sees the flush of cold on her cheeks. He knows where she has been. He does not feel jealousy toward the memory of her past or the son who is not his. He feels gratitude. He knows that while he can fight the giants of fire and stone, he cannot fight the winter. The winter must be endured. And his wife, the golden Sif, holds the keys to that endurance. The mystery of Ullr remains. He is the silent watcher in the woods. But for Sif, he is no mystery. He is the memory of the time when she was wild. He is the proof that she is vast enough to contain both the fire of the summer sun and the ice of the winter moon. And as she settles back into the high seat of Bilskirnir, weaving the peace of the household, she knows that her work is not done. She has raised a son of the winter. Now she must guide a daughter of the storm, for Sif and Thor have a child together, a daughter named Thrud. And if Ullr is the silence of the snow, Thrud is the power of the rising gale. The saga continues. The golden hair is restored. The winter sun is visited. And now the domestic life of the goddess turns to the next generation. A suitor is coming. Not a god, not a giant, but a creature of the dark rock. A dwarf who thinks he can claim the daughter of the thunder. Sif will not need a bow to fight this battle. She will need her wit, her patience, and the cunning that comes from watching the seasons turn. The fire in the hearth crackles, sending sparks up into the chimney. Outside, the wind is picking up. The yew trees of Ullr are far away, but their influence is felt. The strength of the wood is in the handle of the hammer. The strength of the winter is in the blood of the goddess. Let us turn the page to a story of wits, of words, and of the sun that turns flesh to stone. Let us speak of the shield maiden of the hearth. Let us speak of Thrud. The seasons turn, as inevitable as the tide. The winter snows of Ullr melt, retreating up the mountainsides to wait in the deep crevices of the glaciers. The green shoots of spring pierce the thawing mud, and Sif, the golden goddess, feels the quickening of the earth in her own blood. Her hair, restored and magical, glows with the vitality of the new sun. But the cycle of a goddess's life is not merely one of planting and harvesting. It is also one of raising the next generation. We have spoken of the son of the winter, Ullr. Now we must turn our gaze to the daughter of the summer storm. We must speak of Thrud. In the genealogy of the Aesir, Thrud is a figure of striking clarity. Her name literally means strength or power. She is the only daughter born of the union between Thor and Sif. Consider that genetic inheritance. She carries the raw, mountain-crushing force of her father, the Thunderer, and the enduring, life-sustaining resilience of her mother, the Earth. She is not a delicate flower of the court. She is a shield maiden of the hearth. She is the storm that nourishes, the strength that protects. Sif watches her daughter grow with a mixture of pride and trepidation. In Thrud, she sees her own beauty, the fair skin, the bright eyes, but tempered with a steel that Sif rarely shows. Thrud walks through the 540 rooms of Bilskirnir with the stride of a warrior. She lifts the heavy mead casks that 2 men would struggle to carry. She laughs with the same booming joy as her father. Sif knows that Thrud is destined for great things, perhaps even to be a Valkyrie, one of the choosers of the slain who ride over the battlefields. But for now, Thrud is young. She is the jewel of Thrudheim, and in the mythological world, a jewel attracts thieves. It attracts those who wish to possess what they cannot create. The threat to Sif's peace does not always come from the frost giants or the chaotic monsters of the outer void. Sometimes it comes from the dark places beneath the very earth she walks upon. The story of Alvis is often told as a triumph of Thor's wit, but let us look at it through the eyes of the mother who was standing in the shadows, the Husfreyja who was protecting her child. It was a night of deep stillness. Thor was gone, away in the east, hunting trolls or fishing in the vast ocean. The protection of the hall fell to Sif. The fires in the great hearths of Bilskirnir had burned down to glowing beds of embers, casting long, dancing shadows against the tapestries. Sif sat in her high seat weaving. Thrud sat nearby, polishing a shield, the rhythmic scritch-scritch of the cloth against the metal, the only sound in the vast room. Then there was a knock at the door. Not the thunderous pounding of a giant, nor the polite rap of a god. It was a heavy, dull thud, low on the wood. Sif signaled to the servants to open it. Into the golden light of the hall stepped a creature that seemed made of shadow and stone. He was short, broad-shouldered, with skin the color of wet clay and a beard as gray as lichen. His eyes were black beads, intelligent and old, but lacking the warmth of the sun. He was a dvergar, a dwarf. He was dressed in finery, velvet tunics, rings of red gold, a belt of silver. But the clothes sat awkwardly on him, as if he were a statue dressed for a festival. He did not bow. He walked to the center of the hall, his heavy boots echoing on the stone floor. He looked at Sif, then he looked at Thrud. His eyes lingered on the girl with a hunger that made Sif's blood run cold. "I am Alvis," the dwarf announced, his voice sounding like gravel crunching under a boot. "The All-Wise. I have come to claim my bride." The silence in the hall stretched tight as a bowstring. Sif rose from her seat. She did not show fear. She was the queen of Thrudheim, but she felt a deep revulsion. The dwarves were master smiths, yes, and allies of the gods in commerce, but they were creatures of the dark. They belonged to the stone, not the sky. For a daughter of the sun and rain, to be taken into the sunless tunnels of the earth was a death sentence. It was a perversion of the natural order. "There is no bride for you here, Alvis," Sif said, her voice calm but firm. "My daughter is not a ring to be traded." Alvis smiled, a thin, dry expression. "The deal was made, Lady Sif. A promise was given. Perhaps not by you, and perhaps not by the Thunderer, but by the Aesir. A price for a weapon. A wager lost? It matters not. The word of a god is binding. I have come to collect." Sif's mind raced. The gods were careless with their promises. It was entirely possible that Odin or Loki, in some moment of desperation or drunkenness, had promised Thrud to the master smith in exchange for some magical trinket. But Sif was the mother, and in the laws of the North, the mother's consent was not easily bypassed. "Thor is not here," Sif said, stepping between the dwarf and her daughter. Thrud had risen, her hand gripping the edge of the shield, her knuckles white. She looked ready to strike the dwarf down where he stood. Sif put a restraining hand on Thrud's arm. Violence against a guest, even an unwanted one, would break the peace of the hall. "Then I will wait," Alvis said. He sat down on a bench, crossing his short legs. "I have time. The stone does not rush." He sat there for hours. The tension in the hall was suffocating. Sif ordered mead to be brought, fulfilling the bare minimum of hospitality. She watched him. She saw his arrogance. He called himself All-Wise. He believed that because he knew the secrets of the forge and the magic of the deep earth, he was superior to the gods of the shallow sky. He looked at the wooden beams of Bilskirnir with disdain, as if they were impermanent twigs. Sif knew she could not fight him with strength. He was ancient, and his magic was old. She needed time. She needed the sun. But the night was long, and the dwarf was patient. Then the doors burst open. The air pressure in the room dropped instantly. A wind swirled through the hall, scattering the rushes on the floor. Thor stood in the doorway. He was massive, filling the frame, his red beard bristling with static electricity. He had returned. He saw the dwarf sitting on his bench. He saw the fear in the eyes of his servants. He saw the cold anger in Sif's face and the defiant rage in Thrud's posture. "What is this?" Thor's voice was a low rumble, like a storm growling on the horizon. "Who brings the smell of the wet earth into my hall?" Alvis stood up. He was not intimidated. "I am Alvis. I have come for my wife, Thrud. The engagement is sealed." Thor laughed. It was a terrifying sound. "I did not seal it. I am the Father, and I say no." "You cannot break the word of the Aesir," Alvis countered smoothly. "If you do, you are an oath-breaker. Your honor will be as cracked as a broken pot. Is the great Thor a liar?" Thor's hand twitched toward Mjolnir. Sif stepped forward quickly, catching his eye. She knew her husband. His instinct was to smash, to solve the problem with violence. But to kill a guest who claimed a legal right would stain his honor. They had to outmaneuver him. Sif's gaze was significant. She looked at the dwarf, then she looked at the window, where the heavy shutters were closed against the night. Then she looked back at Thor. Thor paused. He saw the silent message. He looked at the dwarf, small, pale, a creature of the absolute dark. He looked at the firelight. He understood. The all-wise dwarf might know the names of all the rocks in the world, but did he know the time? Thor unbuckled his belt. He leaned Mjolnir against the wall. He transformed from the warrior into the trickster, a role he usually despised, but one he had learned from years of traveling with Loki. "You are wise, dwarf," Thor said, his voice dropping to a conversational tone. "I have heard of you. They say you know everything. They say there is nothing in the 9 worlds that is hidden from your mind." Alvis puffed out his chest. "It is true. I have traveled the deep paths. I know the roots of the mountains." "Then let us test this," Thor said, sitting down opposite him. "I will not give my daughter to a fool. If you wish to marry into the family of the Aesir, you must prove your wisdom is equal to our status. I will ask you questions. If you can answer them all, Thrud is yours. If you fail one, you leave alone." Alvis sneered. "Ask, Thunderer. My mind is a library of stone." And so began the Alvismal, the talk of the all-wise. But let us view it not as a quiz, but as a delaying action orchestrated by the household. Sif moved to the side. She poured mead for the dwarf, a large cup, strong and sweet. She wanted him comfortable. She wanted him distracted. She wanted him to love the sound of his own voice so much that he forgot the world outside. "Tell me, Alvis," Thor asked, leaning forward. "What is the earth called in all the worlds? What do the men call it? The gods? The giants?" Alvis began to recite. He spoke with a rhythmic, hypnotic cadence. "Men call it earth. The Aesir call it the field. The Vanir call it the way. The giants call it the deep green. The elves call it the growing one. The gods call it the clay." He was right. He knew the poetic metaphors, the kennings. He drank from the cup Sif offered. "Good," Thor said. "And the sky? What is it called?" "Men call it heaven. The gods call it the height. The wind weaver, the Vanir, call it. The giants call it the upworld. The elves call it the fair roof. The dwarves call it the dripping hall." The contest went on. Thor asked about the moon, the sun, the clouds, the wind, the calm, the sea, the fire, the wood, the night. It was an exhaustive catalogue of the cosmos. Alvis answered every single one. He was brilliant. He was a scholar of the highest order. He knew that the elves called the sun Fairwheel, and the dwarves called it Dvalin's Deceiver. But as he spoke, he did not notice the subtle changes in the room. He did not notice Sif moving to the window. He did not notice that the fire in the hearth was dying down, no longer needed to light the room. He did not notice that Thor's questions were becoming longer, more drawn out. Sif watched the dwarf. She saw the tragedy of his arrogance. He was so obsessed with naming the world that he had ceased to observe it. He knew the word for day, but he did not feel the day coming. He knew the word for sun, but he did not fear its light. He was trapped in his own intellect. Thrud watched her father. She saw the glint in his eye. She realized that this was not a test of knowledge. It was a trap. Her father was fighting for her, not with his muscles, but with his patience. He was holding back the storm to let the dawn do the work. Thor asked the 12th question. "Tell me of the night, Alvis. What is it called?" "Men call it night," Alvis intoned, his voice slightly slurried from the mead. "The gods call it the darkness. The giants call it the unlight. The elves call it a sleep joy. The dwarves call it the dream goddess." "And the seed?" Thor asked. "What is the seed called?" "Men call it barley. The gods call it growth. The Vanir call it the fruit. The giants call it the eaten thing." Alvis finished his answer. He sat back, triumphant. "I have answered all, Thor. I have named the world. Your daughter is mine." Thor stood up. He looked at Sif. Sif nodded. She reached out and unlatched the heavy wooden shutter of the eastern window. "You have answered well, Alvis," Thor said softly. "I have never seen so much ancient wisdom in one breast. But you have forgotten one thing." "What?" Alvis demanded, standing up. "What have I forgotten?" "To look out the window," Thor said. Sif threw the shutters open. The beam of light that entered the hall was not the soft glow of a lamp. It was the hard, blinding, horizontal ray of the rising sun. It was the day star, the Divalin's deceiver. It cut through the smoky air of the hall like a spear of white fire. It struck Alvis full in the face. The dwarf screamed, a short, sharp sound of absolute realization. In Norse mythology, the dwarves are creatures of the subterranean dark. They are made of the primal earth. The sun is their antithesis. It is the petrifying gaze of the celestial order. When the light hit Alvis, the magic that gave him motion and speech evaporated. His skin, the color of wet clay, instantly hardened. The gray of his beard turned to the gray of mossy stone. His eyes, so full of dark intelligence, went blank and white. His mouth, open to protest, froze mid-syllable. In the span of a single heartbeat, the suitor was gone. In his place stood a statue, a perfect, grotesque, incredibly detailed carving of a dwarf, caught in the moment of his hubris. Silence returned to the hall. The dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight that illuminated the stone figure. Thrud let out a breath she had been holding for hours. She walked up to the statue. She touched the stone arm that had reached for her. It was cold. It was just rock. She looked at her father. Thor did not look triumphant. He looked tired. He walked over to Sif and kissed her on the forehead. "He was wise," Thor admitted, looking at the statue. "But he was not smart." Sif looked at the stone dwarf. She felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, certainly. Her daughter was safe. The sanctity of her bloodline was preserved. But there was also a sadness. Alvis had been a keeper of lore. He knew the old names. the names that were being forgotten. Now that knowledge was locked inside a stone mind, never to be spoken again. She turned to Thrud. "You are safe," she said. "I could have fought him," Thrud said, her chin high. "I know," Sif replied, smoothing her daughter's hair. "But a queen does not fight every battle with a sword. Sometimes she fights with the sun." The statue of Alvis remained in the hall. They did not move it. It stood there as a warning and as a monument. It became a part of the household. Guests would marvel at the craftsmanship, thinking it was a work of art commissioned by the gods. Only the family knew the truth, that it was a grave marker for a mind that knew everything except its own limits. This event marked a turning point for Sif. It was a victory, but it was a defensive victory. It showed that the threats to her family were becoming bolder. The sanctity of Asgard was being tested. A dwarf had walked right into the hall and demanded a goddess. What would come next? And as Sif looked at her daughter, she realized that Thrud was no longer a child. The shield maiden aspect was rising. Thrud would not be content to sit and spin. She would want to take up the weapons of her father. She would want to ride with the Valkyrie. And Sif, the mother who wishes to keep her children close, would have to learn the hardest lesson of the earth: letting go. The seed must leave the head of wheat to find its own soil. But before the children scatter, there is one more great trial that the family must face together. A trial of words, of shame, and of the ultimate unraveling of social bonds. We have seen a dwarf turned to stone by the sun. Now, we must prepare for a feast where a god will try to turn the entire pantheon to ash with his tongue. The Lokasenna is coming. The flighting of Loki. And in that hall of Aegir, amidst the drunken gods and the brewing storm of insults, Sif will face her greatest public test. She will not be fighting for her hair or her daughter, but for the very concept of frith, the peace that holds the world together. Loki, who once shore her hair and then restored it, has turned fully to the dark. He is no longer the mischievous prankster. He is the enemy within. And he has a secret, a lie so poisonous that he hopes it will break the heart of the thunder god forever. The sun rises higher over Bilskirnir, warming the stone back of Alvis. Sif turns away from the window. The day has begun. The harvest is safe for now, but the shadows are getting longer, and the winter of the world is drawing near. The statue of Alvis stood in the hall of Bilskirnir, a silent monument to the victory of the sun over the dark. But victory in the Norse cosmos is never permanent. It is merely a pause between storms. The seasons continued their relentless turn. The golden days of summer shortened. The leaves of the world tree, Yggdrasil, began to yellow, and a chill wind blew from the north, carrying with it the scent of iron and salt. It was time for the harvest feast. But this was not a harvest of grain. It was to be a harvest of bitterness. We must now leave the solid ground of Thrudheim and travel to the edge of the ocean, to the hall of Aegir. Aegir is the giant of the sea, a being as old as the chaotic waters themselves, yet an ally of the Aesir. His hall is located at the bottom of the ocean, lit not by fire, but by the glowing gold known as Aegir's fire. It is a place of immense, crushing pressure and strange, wavering light. The floor is covered in white sand. The walls are hung with seaweed and coral. The ale flows as freely as the tides. It was here that the gods gathered for the great feast described in the poem Lokasenna. It was meant to be a celebration of kinship, a reaffirmation of the bonds between the Aesir, the gods of war and rule, and the Vanir, the gods of fertility and wealth. Odin was there in his golden helmet. Frigg, the queen of Asgard, sat beside him. Freya, wearing the necklace Brisingamen, shone like a star. Tyr, the one-handed judge, sat grim and silent, and Sif was there. Sif came alone. Thor was absent. The protector of Asgard was away in the east, harrying trolls, as the poets say. He was doing the bloody work of keeping the borders safe so that the gods could feast in peace. His absence was palpable. Without the Thunderer, the hall felt vulnerable. The ultimate sanction, the hammer, was missing. Sif felt this absence keenly. She sat in the high seat reserved for Thor's wife, her golden hair cascading down her back, a beacon of warmth in the cool, aqueous light of the sea hall. She was the Husfreyja in exile, the representative of the harvest in the realm of the salt water. The feast began well. Aegir's servants, Fimafang and Eldir, moved among the guests, pouring ale that brewed itself in a magical cauldron, the very cauldron Thor had stolen from Hymir in the earlier myths. The gods praised the servants. They praised the ale. They praised the peace. But there was one guest who could not abide the praise: Loki. Loki stood in the shadows near the door. He was no longer the mischievous companion who had helped recover Mjolnir, or who had given Sif her hair. The years of slight, of being the outsider, of being blood brother but never quite brother, had curdled his soul. He looked at the gods, fat, happy, secure in their golden age, and he felt a burning need to burn it all down. He hated their frith. He hated their pretense of order. He stepped forward and killed the servant Fimafang, just like that. A senseless act of violence to break the mood. The gods, outraged, drove him out into the forest. They returned to their drinking, trying to repair the shattered piece, but you cannot repair a cracked cup so easily. Sif sat quietly, her hand gripping her cup. She knew Loki. She knew he would not stay away. She felt the vibration in the floorboards, not the rumble of thunder, but the slither of a snake. And indeed, he returned. He confronted the remaining servant, Eldir, outside the hall. "Tell me," Loki demanded, "what are the Sons of Victory talking about over their ale?" "They talk of weapons and war glory," Eldir replied. "But they have no kind words for you." Loki smiled. "Then I will go in," he said. "I will mix their mead with venom. I will bring shame to the table." He entered the hall. The silence that fell was absolute. It was the silence of a held breath before the executioner's axe falls. Loki stood in the center of the room, his eyes bright with malice. He demanded a drink. He demanded a seat. He invoked the blood oath he had sworn with Odin at the dawn of time. "Do you remember, Odin," Loki sneered, "how we mixed our blood? You promised you would never pour a drink for yourself unless one was brought for me." Odin, bound by the ancient honor of the oath, signaled his silent son Vidar to make room. Loki sat, he drank, and then he opened his mouth. What followed was the flighting, a ritual exchange of insults. But this was no game. Loki moved from god to god, systematically dismantling their myths. He called Idun a slut who slept with her brother's killer. He mocked Gefjun. He taunted Odin for practicing Cedar, woman's magic. He laughed at Frigg for sleeping with Odin's brothers. He called Freya the most corrupt of all, accusing her of sleeping with every god and elf in the hall, including her own brother. Sif watched this destruction with mounting horror. She saw the faces of her kin crumble. She saw the secrets, the dirty, hidden truths of the divine family, laid bare on the table like rotting fish. The social fabric was tearing. The frith was dissolving. Without Thor there to silence him with a blow, the gods were paralyzed by the truth of his words. Loki turned his eyes toward the end of the table. He looked at Bela, the servant of Frey, and mocked her filth. He looked at Tyr and mocked his missing hand. Then the silence stretched. He was running out of targets. His gaze drifted to the high seat where the golden goddess sat. Sif realized she was next. She knew what he would do. He would attack her dignity. He would attack the one thing that defined her, her loyalty. She was the wife of Thor. She was the faithful one. If he could stain her, he would break the heart of the strongest god. Sif did not wait for him to speak. She rose. In a move of supreme diplomatic grace, she walked toward him. She did not draw a knife. She did not shout. She carried a crystal cup, filled to the brim with the finest mead. Her hands, steady and strong, held the vessel out to the enemy. "Hail to you, Loki," Sif said, her voice clear and bell-like in the tense silence. "Take this crystal cup, full of old mead, and admit, for once, that I am the one among the Aesir who is blameless." It was a brilliant maneuver. She was using the ritual of the cupbearer to bind him. By accepting the drink from her hand, he would be accepting her hospitality. He would be forced by the laws of the hall to grant her peace. She was offering him a way out, a way to spare her, and by extension, to spare Thor. She was creating a safe zone in the middle of the verbal slaughter. Loki looked at the cup. He looked at Sif. He saw the golden hair he had once shorn and restored. He saw the beauty that had once made him envious enough to commit a crime. He reached out and took the cup. He drank. He wiped the foam from his lips. He looked at her, and for a second, it seemed he might accept the truce. But Loki was past the point of return. He was drunk on his own malice. He wanted to hurt Thor, and the best way to hurt Thor was to break Sif. "You would be unique, Sif," Loki said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that echoed in every corner of the room. "You would be the only one blameless, if you had been prudent with your love." Sif froze. The hall went deathly still. "But I know one," Loki continued, leaning in, "who knows you well. One who slipped into the bed of the Thunderer when he was away. One who untied the golden girdle of the Earth Goddess." He paused for effect. "That one was me," Loki said. "Loki Laufeyjarson." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. "I know one. That one was me." It was a claim of infidelity. It was a claim that Sif, the paragon of wifely virtue, the goddess of the home, the mother of strength, had slept with the trickster. Sif did not scream. She did not faint. She stood there, the empty space where the cup had been now a void between her hands. Her face drained of color, turning as white as the winter snow of Ullr's realm. Was it true? The myths never explicitly say. The Lokasenna is a poem of ambiguity. Loki is the father of lies, but the power of his insults in this poem comes from the fact that most of them are true. Odin did practice magic. Freyja is promiscuous. Tyr did lose his hand. The devastating power of the flyting relies on the exposure of secrets. If it was a lie so heinous that it stained her honor just by being spoken. It planted a seed of doubt in the minds of every god present. It suggested that the perfect marriage of the storm and the soil was a sham. If it was true, if in some lonely hour, while Thor was gone for years in the east, the silver-tongued trickster had seduced the lonely goddess, then the betrayal was cosmic. It would mean that the chaos had already entered the home. Sif stared at him. Her eyes, usually the warm blue of a summer sky, turned to the cold gray of a storm front. She felt the weight of the golden hair on her neck, the hair he had given her. Was that the price? Was the hair a gift or a purchase? The complexity of their history twisted in her gut. She did not dignify him with a denial. To deny would be to engage. To engage would be to lower herself to his level. She turned her back on him. She walked back to her seat, her head high, but her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had offered peace. He had returned war. Loki laughed. He had done it. He had silenced the Husfreyja. He had cracked the foundation of Thor's house. But he had forgotten one thing. He had forgotten the timing. Just as the echo of his insult faded, the floor of Aegir's hall shook. The water in the cups rippled. The golden fire of the hall flickered. "Silence, you wretch!" The voice came from the door, but it sounded like it came from the throat of a volcano. Thor was there. He had returned. He stood in the doorway, and he was not the laughing, drinking companion. He was the Asator, Thor the god. His eyes burned with a light that made the gold of the hall look dim. He held Mjolnir in his iron-gloved hand, and the knuckles were white. He did not know exactly what had been said, but he saw the face of his wife. He saw the shame in her posture. He saw the smirk on Loki's face. "Silence!" Thor roared again. "Or my hammer, Mjolnir, will shut your mouth for you. I will knock your head off your shoulders." Loki turned. He saw the death he had been courting all night. But even now, he could not resist one last jab. "Oh, look," Loki drawled. "The son of Earth has arrived. Why do you rage so, Thor? You won't be so bold when you fight the wolf." "I will break every bone in your body," Thor promised, taking a step forward. The air crackled. The pressure in the undersea hall became unbearable. Loki looked at Thor. He looked at the hammer. He knew that the time for words was over. The violence he had provoked was finally here. "I have spoken to the gods," Loki said, backing away. "I have spoken to the sons of gods. But for you alone, I will leave. For I know that you do strike." He turned to the door. But before he left, he cast a curse on Aegir's hall. "May everything you own burn. May the fire consume this place." And then he was gone. He fled into the water, transforming into a salmon, diving into the Franangersfors waterfall, trying to escape the wrath he had summoned. But the damage was done. The feast was ruined. The gods sat in the wreckage of their dignity. Sif sat in her high seat watching Thor. He did not come to her immediately. He was pacing, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning the shadows for the enemy. She saw the doubt in his eyes, or perhaps she only imagined it. Had he heard? Did he know what Loki had said? The accusation of infidelity hung between them like a ghost. It would never be spoken of. Thor would never ask. Sif would never explain. But the innocence of the Golden Age was over. The frith was broken. The family was tainted by the suspicion of betrayal. This moment in Lokasenna marks the psychological end of the gods' power. They are no longer the untouchable rulers of the cosmos. They are a dysfunctional clan tearing itself apart from the inside. And Sif, the symbol of unity, was the final victim. The gods left Aegir's hall in silence. They returned to Asgard, but the Golden City felt different. The shadows seemed longer. The wind felt colder. Thor and Sif returned to Bilskirnir. The 540 rooms felt empty. They lay in their bed, the same bed where the hair had been shorn years ago. Thor slept eventually, exhausted by his rage, but Sif lay awake. She touched her golden hair. She thought of the cup she had offered. She thought of the lie, or the truth, that Loki had spoken. She realized that the harvest does not last forever. The fields must eventually be stripped bare. And she felt, deep in the earth, the stirring of something terrible. The winter that was coming was not the seasonal winter of Ullr. It was the great winter, the Fimbulwinter, the time when the sun would fail, the hair of the earth would freeze and break, and the bonds of kinship, already frayed by Loki's tongue, would snap completely. The golden wheat had been harvested. Now the stubble would be burned. Sif closed her eyes, and for the first time in her immortal life, she felt old. She felt the weight of the prophecy. She knew that her son Ullr would soon be the only god who could survive outside. She knew that her daughter Thrud would have to pick up the hammer. And she knew that her husband, the mighty Thor, was walking toward a battle he could not win. The feast was over. The famine was about to begin. The silence that followed the feast in Aegir's hall was not the peaceful silence of a winter night. It was the silence of a clock that has stopped ticking. The gods returned to Asgard, but the golden light of the eternal realm had dimmed. Sif, the lady of the sown field, felt the change first. She felt it not in the air, but in her bones. She felt it in the roots of her hair, the golden filaments that connected her to the deep earth. The pulse of the world was slowing down. The heartbeat of the seasons was becoming erratic. Then the snow began to fall. It was not the gentle, blanketing snow of Ullr's domain, the snow that protects the sleeping grain. It was a hard, driving snow, gray as iron filings. It fell for days, then weeks, then months. The sun, pale and sickly, struggled to rise above the horizon, offering no heat. The summer did not come. The wheat in the fields of Midgard blackened and rotted in the husk. The cattle starved in the byres. The bonds of kinship, which Sif had spent an eternity weaving, began to fray. Brothers fought brothers for a scrap of bread. Fathers turned on sons. The social contract, the frith, dissolved into a chaos of hunger. This was the Fimbulwinter, the Great Winter. For Sif, this was not just a weather event. It was a physical dismantling of her being. She is the earth. As the ice locked the land in an unbreakable grip, Sif grew pale. Her skin, once flushed with the warmth of the harvest, turned the color of marble. Her golden hair, usually vibrant and flowing, became brittle and dull, like dry straw in a drought. She moved through the 540 rooms of Bilskirnir like a ghost, wrapped in heavy furs, shivering with a cold that no fire could thaw. Thor watched her with helpless rage. He was the god of action. He could smash giants. He could wrestle old age. He could drink the tides. But he could not punch the winter. He could not fight the entropy of the universe. He stoked the fires of the hall until the chimneys roared, but the cold seeped through the stone walls. He saw his wife fading, and for the first time the Thunderer felt fear. He realized that his strength was meaningless without her vitality. The storm cannot rage if the earth is dead. Sif, however, possessed a wisdom that Thor lacked. Remember, Snorri called her a Sibyl. She was a seeress. She knew that this winter was not a punishment, but a necessity. The cycle had to break. The world had grown old and stained with the broken oaths of the gods. The blood of the giant builder, the lies of Loki, the theft of the apples, it all had to be washed away. She accepted her fading. She accepted the Fimbulwinter as the final, terrible harvest. She called her children to her. First came Ullr. The god of winter was in his element now. He was strong, vibrant, his eyes shining like shards of ice. The Fimbulwinter was his kingdom. Sif looked at her firstborn and saw the survivor. "The wolf is coming," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves. "The sun will be eaten." Ullr nodded. He did not need words. He strung his yew bow. He checked his skis. He would not fight in the great battle of Vigrid. His war was the war of survival. He would go into the deep forests, into the yew dales, and he would wait. He would guard the spark of life in the frozen dark. He was the seed that sleeps through the apocalypse. Then came Thrud. The daughter of the storm was fully grown now. She wore armor of bright steel. She carried a shield that bore the mark of the thunderbolt. Sif saw the fire of Thor in her eyes. "Do not weep for the field," Sif told her daughter. "The field must be plowed under. You are the shield maiden now. You must stand where the lightning strikes." Thrud kissed her mother's cold hand. She took her place by her father's side. She would not hide. She would ride to the end of the world. And then the horn blew. Heimdall, the watcher on the Bifrost, sounded the Gjallarhorn. The sound tore through the silence of the Fimbulwinter. It shattered the ice on the roofs of Asgard. It woke the sleeping dead. Ragnarok had begun. Thor stood up from his high seat. He picked up Mjolnir. He looked at Sif. There were no words left to say. The time for domestic peace was over. The time for the Husfreyja to pour the mead was gone. He placed a hand on her cheek, his hand, rough and warm, against her skin, cold and pale. It was the final touch between the sky and the earth. He turned and walked out of the door. he walked out to meet the serpent. Sif did not follow him. Her place was not on the battlefield of Vigrid. Her place was at the center of the world that was ending. She sat in her high seat in the empty hall of Bilskirnir. She felt the vibrations of the battle through the soles of her feet. She felt the shudder of the earth as the wolf broke his chains. She felt the scream of the world as the fire giant Surt flung his flames across the sky. She closed her eyes and extended her senses. She did not look with her eyes. She looked with the spirit of the land. She felt the ocean rising. The Midgard serpent, Jormungandr, was thrashing in the deep, creating tidal waves that swallowed the coastlines. She felt the poison dripping from its fangs, burning the air, turning the soil toxic. This was the anti-harvest. Instead of rain, there was venom. Instead of growth, there was rot. She felt Thor meet the beast. The connection between husband and wife, between god and goddess, is a bond of energy. Sif felt every blow. She felt the shockwave as Mjolnir struck the serpent's scale. She felt the heat of the poison spraying over Thor's shield. She felt his rage, his glorious, defiant, absolute refusal to yield. He was fighting for her. He was fighting to kill the thing that threatened the sanctity of the home. She felt the moment of victory. The serpent's skull shattered. The chaos was defeated. But then she felt the silence. Thor took 9 steps. 1, 2, 3. Sif stopped breathing. She felt the poison entering his blood. The ether, the absolute antithesis of life. It was cold, colder than the Fimbulwinter. It stopped the heart of the thunder. 8, 9. He fell. The connection snapped. In the high hall of Bilskirnir, Sif screamed. It was not a sound that could be heard by human ears. It was the sound of a continent cracking. It was the sound of the tectonic plates shifting. The anchor was gone. The weight that held her to the sky was gone. She was untethered. At that moment, the fires of Surt reached Asgard. The Bifrost Bridge shattered. The Great Hall, the 540 rooms of domestic order, caught fire. Sif did not move. She sat on her throne as the flames consumed the tapestries, the tables, the bed where she had slept for eons. She burned, nutrients to the soil. As Sif was consumed by fire, the nutrients were returned to the soil, and the field was cleansed of the rot. The fire was a cleansing, a purification, a renewal. It was a reminder of the power of nature, of the cycle of life and death. And as the fire burned, the field was reborn, a new beginning, nutrients to the soil. As Sif was consumed by the cosmic fire, she was not destroyed. She was transmuted. She became the ash. She became the potential. She went down into the dark, not as a victim, but as a seed. The world ended. The sun went black. The earth sank into the sea. The silence returned, absolute, void, empty. But time in mythology is a circle, not a line. Eons passed in the dark, or perhaps only a moment. Time had no meaning without the sun to measure it. Then, slowly, the water receded. A new peak broke the surface of the gray ocean. Then another. The sun, the daughter of the old sun, rose in the east, brighter and cleaner than her mother. Her light struck the wet, black earth, and something green pushed through the ash. It was a stalk of wheat. Unsown, the prophecy says. The fields would grow without labor. The earth had healed itself. Sif had returned. She was no longer the queen in the hall. She was the land itself, renewed, vibrant, and wild. She was the green grass of Idaval, the plain where the survivors gathered. And who were these survivors? They were the children. Modi and Magni, the sons of Thor, walked out of the ruin. They carried Mjolnir between them. The hammer was no longer a weapon of war. It was a relic, a tool to hallow the new earth. And there, walking from the deep woods on his skis, came Ullr. The winter had passed, and the hunter had survived. They met in the tall grass. They looked at the new world. It was quiet. It was peaceful. The giants were gone. The monsters were dead. Sif's spirit was in the wind that ruffled their hair. She was in the bread they would bake from the wild grain. She was the memory of the frith that they would build again. She had survived the fire to become the foundation of the new age. But her legacy did not stop at the edge of the myth. It reached forward, into the world of men, into the history that would follow the age of the gods. Sif's influence lingered in the folklore of the North for centuries. We see it most clearly in the veneration of the rowan tree. The rowan, the Sorbus aucuparia, is a tree with red berries, often associated with protection against witchcraft. In the myth of Thor's journey to Geirrod, it was a rowan tree that he grabbed to pull himself out of the swollen river. The proverb says, "The rowan is the salvation of Thor." But why the rowan? The rowan is a hardy tree. It grows in high, rocky places where nothing else can survive. It is stubborn. It is beautiful. And its berries are red, like the blood of the earth, or like the red gold of a certain goddess's hair. Many scholars believe the rowan was originally sacred to Sif before it was associated with Thor. It is the female protection. The wood of the rowan was used to make rune staves, to ward homes, to keep the milk from souring. It was the domestic shield. Every time a Norse woman pinned a sprig of rowan over her door, she was invoking Sif. She was asking for the sanctity of the home to be preserved against the chaos outside. She was asking for her own 540 rooms to be safe. And we see her in the language. The word sippe, kin, survived. It became the root of how we understand family. We are not just individuals floating in a void. We are Sif's children, bound by invisible threads of obligation and love. Even in the archaeology of the Viking Age, we find her silent presence. We find the Mjolnir pendants, yes, thousands of them. But we also find small female figures, gold foil figures called guldgubbar. These often depict a man and a woman embracing, or a woman offering a cup. This is the holy marriage. This is Thor and Sif. These were placed in the post holes of longhouses, buried in the earth to ensure the stability of the home. They were prayers to Sif, asking her to hold the roof up, just as she held up the spirit of the Thunderer. So, where is Sif now? She is in the golden fields of September. When you drive past a wheat field in the late afternoon, and the sun hits the grain, turning it into a sea of living gold, you are looking at her hair. When the wind moves through the stalks, making them whisper, you are hearing her voice. She is in the quiet strength of the family table. When you break bread with your kin, when you offer a drink to a guest, when you work to keep the peace in your home, despite the storms of the world outside, you are performing the rites of Sif. She is the reminder that while the storm is loud and exciting, it is the earth that sustains us. The storm passes, the hammer falls, but the wheat grows back, the hair grows back. Sif is the survivor. As we end this saga, let the image of the golden goddess settle in your mind, not as a victim of a prank, not as a passive wife, but as the enduring, resilient, life-giving force of the cosmos. She is the beauty that returns after the fire. She is the promise that the winter will end. Thank you for walking the fields of Thrudheim with me, from the sowing to the harvest, from the shearing to the regrowth. If you found comfort in this tale of the golden goddess, and if you wish to hear more whispers from the ancient hearths, please leave a like and subscribe to Hearths of Myths. May your fields be golden, may your home be safe, and may your kinship be strong. Sleep well.